Hello, welcome to What Edgar Allan Poe Can Teach You About Game Design. This talk is meant as a fun general introduction to game design for those who are just getting into it, and hopefully offer a few fresh ideas to people who are more experienced, as well as offering a different perspective on where to expand your view on game design and how you can learn lessons from anywhere. I'm Buddy Frost from Frost Playing Games. I'm a founder and game designer of Frost Playing Games and a founder and game director for Monomaly. Here I am with some of my team members, various events. This is Pave, this is the board game we design. We now publish this game ourselves. It's available in stores and you can play it just out there if you want to check it out. This is Monomaly. This is our online digital card game that's currently in early alpha, as you can tell from the placeholder graphics there. Hopefully I can share more about that later, but it's still in development. So I love game design and process. But when I started to get into this, it was much harder to find anything on it. The first place I ever saw anything about game design was the Portal developer commentary. That's where I first saw people actually talking through their process. I've also learned a lot from Mark Rosewater, the lead designer for Magic the Gathering, and his blogger. And also I was very into math games that I learned from science magazines as a child, such as John Conway. When I was looking around for poetry, though, one day, I stumbled on an essay by Edgar Allan Poe. It turned out to be the best writing on design process I'd ever seen. Laid out a very methodical approach to creation from scratch that I'd never seen before. I'd only seen bits and pieces of design wisdom and ways to think about games, but never a full process. It was published in 1846 issue of Graham's magazine. Details how Poe wrote his famous poem, The Raven. George Rex Graham, a friend of Poe's, actually declined to be the first to publish The Raven. He made up for this by publishing the essay when he had a chance. The essay was controversial at the time, with many not believing that someone could write a poem on purpose with a process. There was this feeling that poetry simply happened as if it was channeled from the gods. Such as T.S. Eliot, who just was a hater in general. He says, it's difficult for us to read that essay without reflecting that if Poe plotted out his poem with such calculation, he might have taken a little more pains over it. The result hardly does credit to the method. I would disagree with T.S. Eliot, and I thought the essay not only made sense, but provided a great blueprint for not just poetry, but for game design and any other creative work where you wish to make something on purpose. Like The Raven, I was able to pick up little trinkets of wisdom from this essay to form the basis of my own philosophy of game design. I'll be using some quotes from the essay, but also summarizing as much as I can, as it's quite floridly written and very complex and confusing grammar. So we'll begin with the central question at the start of the essay. It is, of the innumerable effects or impressions of which heart, the intellect, or more generally, the soul is susceptible, what shall I, on the innumerable effects or impressions of being, what one shall I present on this occasion? So this goes on to the central guiding point with everything working towards a unity of effect. He posits that everything in the work should work towards one effect. Or to put it in game terms, what one thing do I want the player to feel and experience? There may be a variety of experience and feelings, but there should be one central feeling, one central idea that everything works towards. But first, we need to talk about why we're creating this work in the first place. The Raven was to be published in a magazine, and this meant it needed to be appropriate for that context. And also, the kinds of people you want to reach and the reception you want is important. Let us dismiss as irrelevant to the poem, per se, the circumstance, or say the necessity, which in the first place gave rise to the intention of composing a poem that should suit at once the popular and the critical taste. So considering the context and the audience is important here. Different platforms have different audiences, tastes, and expectations. Core decisions are going to be different if the game is intended for a phone, the latest consoles, or the PC. One such decision is one of length. The initial consideration was that of extent. If any literary work is too long to be read in one sitting, we must be content to dispense with the immensely important effect derivable from the unity of impression. For if 2 sittings be required, the affairs of the world interfere, and everything like totality is at once destroyed. So in this case, he was concerned about being able to read the poem in 1 sitting in order to get the full effect. So the length of the experience is important. When considering the length, we need to think about not just the entire game, but the portions of the game that players will experience. You need to consider what the audience expects from this kind of game. The length also needs to fit the effect. An epic journey that is over in 30 minutes doesn't feel epic. If the game is longer than a single sitting, you need to consider how to make the portions of the game, whether that is distinct levels or other breakpoints. So now we get on to the effect. But in a very writerly fashion, he contemplates the meta effect of the effect. I should be carried too far to my immediate topic were I to demonstrate a point upon which I have repeatedly insisted, in which, with the poetical, stands not in the slightest need of demonstration the point that beauty is the sole legitimate province of the poem. When indeed men speak of beauty, they mean precisely not a quality, as is supposed, but an effect. They refer, in short, to that of intense and pure elevation of the soul, not of the intellect or of the heart, upon which I have commented, and which is experienced in consequence of contemplating the beautiful. Beauty is the effect of the effect. So in games, fun is the sole legitimate province of games. Whatever the effect is chosen, it needs to be in some way fun. You can make a game with a unity of effect, but if the effect doesn't contribute to fun, it can be a failure. If you create a masterful unity of effect and say, create the most effective and brutal experience of revenge and cycles of violence ever depicted, some might not enjoy it. If you really want to explore a different effect, you have to make sure your audience is ready for it and expects it. Or you need to find a way to make your effect fun. Horror, sadness, frustration, and other strong emotions all can successfully exist in games if it still finds a way to be fun. An example of this going wrong is from Magic the Gathering. In one of their sets, they focus on the Eldrazi, these massive aliens from beyond the realms of comprehension. It was the second time we saw them, and this time they aimed to make them feel as alienating and as oppressive as possible. People hated this set, as it felt alienating and oppressive. They achieved their effect, but it was one that people didn't want in their fun little card game. So from here, we go into the more specific tone of the effect. Regarding, then, beauty as my province, my next question referred to the tone of its highest manifestation, and all experience has shown that this tone is one of sadness. Beauty, of whatever kind, in its supreme development, invariably excites the sensitive soul to tears. Melancholy is thus the most legitimate of all the poetical tones. Tone in games is a bit more broad and doesn't just apply to themes and the literal aspects of the game. It also applies to the nature of play itself. Is it relaxed or intense, rushed or slow, casual or competitive? And how does this all relate to difficulty? So once we have the tone and have started to create the effect, we look on to some mechanics. It betook myself to ordinary induction with the view of obtaining some artistic piquancy which might serve me as a keynote in the construction of the poem, some pivot upon which the whole structure might turn. And carefully thinking over all the usual artistic effects, or more properly points in the theatrical sense, I did not fail to perceive immediately that no one had been so universally employed than that is the refrain. So we need to find a mechanical hook that supports the tone to build the game around. This can be how you interact with the game, a novel way of winning the game, the way the content is generated, such as procedural systems or progression or leveling systems of the game, and how, then, can we make this more unique? These points being settled, I next bethought to me of the nature of my refrain. Since its application was to be repeatedly varied, it was clear that the refrain itself must be brief, For there would have been an insurmountable difficulty in the frequent variations of application in any sentence of length. In proportion to the brevity of the sentence would, of course, be the facility of the variation. This led me at once to a single word as the best refrain. So how can you make your mechanic more unique and expressive? A newer game that I've fallen in love with, Fretless, takes a standard turn-based RPG combat and turns it into a musical masterpiece with timing aspect. You know how Bellectro turned normal poker scoring into a roguelike classic by adding more and more chaotic layers. Or you can have the more Poe-like approach of Journey, where the multiplayer aspects were stripped down to wordless and anonymous interactions, adding to the mysterious and wondrous tone. So now we get to the long section where he chooses the content to fill out this mechanic and its justification. The sound of the refrain being thus determined, it became necessary to select a word embodying this sound, and at the same time, in the fullest possible, keeping with the melancholy at which I had predetermined as the tone of the poem. In such a search would have been absolutely impossible to overlook the word nevermore. In fact, it was the very first which presented itself. And now he's got the word, he needs to be justified with a speaker. The next desideratum was a pretext for the continuous use of one word, nevermore, and observing the difficulty which I at once found in inventing a sufficiently plausible reason for the continuous repetition. Here then immediately arose the idea of a non-reasoning creature capable of speech, and very naturally a parrot in the first instance suggested itself, but was superseded forthwith by a raven, as equally capable of speech and infinitely more in keeping with the tone. So now we have the content and the justification of the mechanic. Making each thing follow naturally, we've gone from a refrain, a simple mechanic, to the emblem and title of the work. And so how can your content best display the characteristics and contribute to the effect? Big example of this is Plants versus Zombies. The mechanics came first. It was fixed objects versus something slow moving. So plants were chosen, as we all know, they're fixed in place, and zombies were chosen because we all culturally understand them to be slow moving. So usually this kind of information would come from conventions of a setting, but here the mechanics were so important to support that the specific ideas were chosen to represent them, and we got a wild and memorable theme. And so now we can start getting into more specifics. I have now gone as far as the conception of the raven, the bird of ill omen, monotonously repeating the one word nevermore. The conclusion of each stanza in a poem of a melancholy tone and the length of about 100 lines. Now, never losing myself, losing sight of the object supremeness of perfection at all points, I ask myself, of all melancholy topics, what, according to the universal understanding of mankind, is the most melancholy? Death was the obvious reply. So this is how the summary of how we got here and how we get to the main theme, the death of a loved one. So now we've thought through all the elements, the work is starting to come together, we have a blueprint, and we can start building. I composed this stanza at this point first by establishing the climax. I might the better vary and graduate as regards the serious of importance the preceding queries of the lover, and secondly, that I might definitely settle the rhythm, the meter, and the length and general arrangement of the stanza, as well as graduate the stanzas which were to precede, so that none of them might surpass in rhythmical effect. I've spared you from having to read the stanza of poetry, but here he talks about the climactic and most exciting of the poem and how he began by writing that first. This is a vertical slice. When it comes to building your game, build it at its best. Show off the effect you want to create above all else, and then you can start to further build out the world and sense of place of the game. The next point to be considered was the mode of bringing together the lover and the raven. And the first branch of this consideration was the locale. I determined then to place the lover in his chamber, in a chamber rendered sacred to him by memories of her who had frequented. So setting is a source of dense information. It's the place where things happen. Putting aside all the world building and scattered lore, a game like Elden Ring communicates so much of its tone just with the idea of its setting. Vast landscapes, ancient ruins, and an astonishing huge tree and view already tell you so much about what the game is. And then there's a game like Settlers of Catan, where the board uses setting to justify the different qualities of a hex board, the ideas of claiming space, the need for roads, and other mechanics. Even at my game Pave, the simple board without theming was chosen to support the idea of a focused strategy game where the mechanics are the main pool. And so now we have a sense of place. We introduce our mechanics and content. The next point to be considered was the mode of bringing together the lover and the raven. And the first bunch of this consideration, I determined to place, I messed it up, sorry. No, it's a bit wrong. It was the locale being determined, I now introduced the bird. And the thought of introducing him through the window was inevitable. The idea of making the lover suppose in the first instance that the flapping of the wings of the bird against the shutter is a tapping at the door originated as a wish to increase by prolonging the reader's curiosity and a desire to admit the incidental effect arising from the lover's throwing open the door, finding all dark, and then adopting the spirit of his mistress that knocked. Difficult to read. So introducing your components are important. The way you introduce your themes can support them. The way you introduce your mechanics, well, that's even more vital. Do you make a tutorial? Do you set everything up in a way where they build on each other and learning them is natural? Tears of the Kingdom has one of the best simultaneous introductions of themes, location, and mechanics by putting you in the sky, then making you fall from it, seeing everything in the vast scope of the game in one big instance. And finally, we have my favorite paragraph from the whole essay. Of course, I pretend to no originality in either the rhythm or meter of the raven. The former is trochaic, you will see. The latter is octameter acatalectic, alternating with heptameter catalectic, repeated in the refrain of the fifth verse, and terminating in tetrameter catalectic. Less pedantically, the feet employed throughout trochees consist of a long syllable followed by a short. The first line of the stanza consists of 8 of these feet, the second of 7.5, in effect 2/3, the third of 8, the fourth of 7.5, the fifth the same, the sixth 3.5. So why did I just read all that? Get technical. This is the best evidence that poets have to know all the technical side of what they're making, and so should game designers. The technical details are important, and being able to communicate them is even more important. You're going to have to talk to programmers and manufacturers eventually, and you should know enough to communicate things to them. And knowing how systems work can also give you new ideas to work with. With physical ideas, materials and construction can be used as a tool to further your effect too. So the key takeaways of this essay by Edgar Allan Poe is choose an effect that is still fun, consider the context and audience, make a mechanic unique, make your details follow each other, make use of your symbols and themes, and understand the technical details. But how do you actually use this process in reality? Firstly, you don't need to follow this exact order. Your starting point can be anywhere in the process, as long as everything's followed from that point and all points in the direction of an overall effect. You can start with your unique take on a mechanic and find a tone that suits it. You can have a creative idea for a world and then find mechanical ways of interacting with it. Or you can start simply from the feelings or themes and work out from there. And now we do have robust theories of game design, and we no longer have to scramble to find it like I do. We have things like design pillars, which are a way of keeping track of your effects. Your pillars are often the themes, experiences, and tone that make up your overall effect. We also have a lot of research into core player motivations. These are also to do with the effect of the game. Motivations are the effects that the players are looking for in games. So making these effects part of your pillars is now like common practice. Make connections between ideas and justify each choice. So you now need to think about what each element actually means and how you can connect them. In that essay, there was a lot of through natural induction, this follows from that. Every idea seemed to suggest the next step. So you need to learn how to make these connections by thinking through what each idea kind of has around it and what people expect from context. And learn about as many mechanics and technical aspects as you can. In order to be able to just come up with mechanics, you need to know about them. Maybe learn about game theory and math. Learn about like the conventions of genre and common game mechanics. Learn about theories of play and how we interact and psychology of play. Competitive theories. If you're making a competitive game, you should know about things like metagames and those kind of things. And if you're making physical games, you should know about manufacturing and what materials are available. You should know about the engines and maybe just a little bit of programming or just enough to be able to communicate things to programmers. So, how did I use this process? When I designed the board game Parve, I started with the intention to make a two-player board game. I considered the length of playtime and wanted to make it very quick. I wanted to make a game for everyone, the kind of game that grandparents would teach a grandchild. So to make something like that, it needed to be a small board. I then started the thoughts about mechanics with the win condition. I'd only seen this win condition in one other game, and it was Nash or Hex. That was the idea of connecting two sides of the board. I then thought of how you would connect the sides and thought instead of having players with different pieces competing to connect, I would be like, what if you were connecting with one singular line? So the line matters to both players and you're fighting with it. So then I had to say, how are you fighting with the line? And introduce the idea of piece stacking, which I took from Upwards, which was basically Scrabble with stacking. And finally, I needed to decide how the players got the pieces. I decided that a shared randomized bag would allow for the idea of an exciting draw step, wondering what piece you would get each turn. Once I had all these ideas, I built the game in about an hour and a half, playtested it with my now business partner Rox, and found we had something special. As for the design process from Anomaly, that's a topic for another talk, but it's very much influenced by these ideas as well. So I need to summarize all the lessons of this talk in the most succinct way possible. The design process is love games, know games, think about games, and try to make a good game on purpose. Thank you. Buddy Frost, here's my content information. Do we have time for questions? Yeah, anyone have questions? No? You're all good? All right, well then that's it then. Thank you very much.